Hi, welcome to You Didn't Get the Memo. I'm your host, Gloria Bailey Ray, and I'm excited that you guys decided to join us for this special presentation today. We're going to be talking about the COVID vaccine, the COVID virus, and the vaccines used to prevent it. I'm tongue-tied today, you guys. I'm so excited because our guest is going to just break it down for us. And if you have questions, I'm going to ask that you put it in the comment section and we'll do our very best to get to all of your questions. Also, if you'll do me a favor this time, if you'll put in where you are viewing from, city and state would be great, or state, but I would really appreciate it. But for those of you who've never watched or tuned in to You Didn't Get the Memo, let me remind you that You Didn't Get the Memo show is about providing you, the viewer, with relevant, factual, mainstream information to help you be informed and to make informed decisions. Again, as I said, my guest today is Dr. Sherilynn Cooke, and we are going to be talking about COVID-19 and the vaccines to prevent COVID. So we're going to demystify all of that. A little bit about Dr. Cooke is that she's a primary care physician in internal medicine. She graduated from Stanford University School of Medicine, UCLA. She has a master's of public health. She is currently the president of the Sinclair-Miller Medical Association. She's an affiliate of the National Medical Association. And it's really important that you know that she has no financial interest in COVID-19 vaccines. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in and welcome to the show, Dr. Cooke. Dr. Cooke, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Gloria, for having me. I'm really excited. And I also wanted to congratulate you on the recent award you received from Coffee TV as one of the leaders of African-American businesswomen. So congratulations.
Yeah, thank you so very much. Well, you know, we've got a big show, and I am just honored that you were willing to sit down and to talk about COVID, because there's so many questions. There's been so much out there, but one of the things that I can appreciate about you is your way to simplify and explain, you know, COVID and also the vaccines, because there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. So without further ado, what I'm going to do, but before we do that, I'm going to ask you a little bit about your backstory. You know, what is it that prompted you to say, look, I need to get in and talk about COVID so that people understand? And then tell us a little bit about where you were raised. Can you do that?
Okay, well, as president of Sinclair-Miller Medical Association, which is comprised primarily of African-American physicians, but physicians who definitely work in underserved communities, it's extremely important that underserved communities understand what's going on in terms of COVID-19 virus and also in terms of vaccinations. There's a lot of misinformation out there. It is a complex scientific area, but I believe it can be broken down. And my backstory is I actually grew up in Compton, and as we say, a proud product of Compton, and, you know, attended school. And I actually became a public health educator before I went back to medical school. So I'm sort of a career switcher. I went to medical school at 34. So I have a passion about educating the public, and I believe that you can understand what's going on. Everybody can understand this. So I try to help as much as I can to make sure that happens.
All right. I appreciate that. And the fact, like you said, you Compton. All right. Compton in the house for sure.
Everybody in Compton's not a rapper.
Right. A lot of educated people have come out of Compton. So, you know, it's like everything else that when people don't know, right? So let's start with the fact that you're going to be talking about COVID. And I'm going to just turn it over to you, and let's
Well, thank you very much, Gloria. So yes, what I'd like to cover today are 5 of the questions that I most frequently get. So I believe this will answer a lot of questions that people have. I believe it's what you absolutely need to know about the COVID-19 vaccines. And we will also have an opportunity for you to ask questions. So what we're going to cover this morning is why the vaccine is important. How do the vaccines work? How were they developed so fast? That's a question that I get all the time. Are the vaccines safe, and are there side effects? So we can move to the next slide. So I'd like you just to take a really good look at this picture, and it's a diagram of a COVID-19 virus, coronavirus. And you'll see that it is just a round ball. Basically, it's colored gray in this instance. But what I really want you to pay attention to are the red things sticking off the sides of this virus. Those are called spike proteins. And it's important to understand and kind of visualize what a spike protein is in order to understand, number one, how the virus makes you sick and how it transmits it. So just keep in mind that the genetic material that makes us sick from COVID-19 is in the gray sphere. It's in the gray ball. The red things are the spike proteins, which simply enable it to attach to our human cells to then transmit the infectious part into our bodies. So next slide. Why is it important? Well, as of March, there were over 28 million deaths and a million cases, and over 500,000 deaths in the United States. These are huge numbers. When I started doing this presentation in December, there were about 350,000 deaths in the United States, and it has jumped up to over 500,000. The other thing that I found striking is this report, which shows that between February 1st of 2020 and January 2nd of 2021, COVID-19 was the third leading cause of death in the United States, behind heart disease and cancer. But the thing that you need to consider is a year prior, COVID-19 wasn't even on the list whatsoever, and it's now the third leading cause of death. Next slide. The other thing that is critical to understand, that a lot of people have heard about this already, but COVID-19 disproportionately affects communities of color, elderly people, essential workers, and those in cramped conditions. Now, we know often communities of color are underserved in care in terms of medical care. We often have cramped living conditions. Often we are essential workers. We can't work from home. We have to go into the office. And then, of course, elderly people who have many, many underlying medical conditions. So all four of these things really disproportionately affect communities of color. So communities of color are definitely impacted more severely than other communities. So it's important to keep that in mind. And cramped conditions, I just want to point out, can be either at home in multi-generational families, but also people who are working in factories. One of the huge outbreaks in California was in a chicken processing factory where people were working in very close conditions at work. Okay, we can move on. So currently there are 3 COVID-19 vaccines available on the market. The first to come out was Pfizer, then Moderna, and most recently Johnson & Johnson. So I just want to take a minute to talk about the effectiveness of these vaccines, and there are caveats involved in these. So Pfizer is 95% effective in terms of people becoming seriously ill or dying from COVID-19. Moderna is about 94.5% effective, which essentially is the same as 95%. That's too close to really even distinguish. Those vaccines require 2 injections. Pfizer is 1, then ideally the second injection 3 weeks later. Moderna, you have your first one, and ideally 4 weeks later, you have your second injection. Johnson & Johnson recently came out, and interestingly, you will notice that some of the reports say it's about 72% effective, anywhere between 72 and 85%. But the important thing to keep in mind is, first of all, it's 1 injection. But keep in mind that it's 85% effective against preventing severe disease. So essentially, if you get the Johnson & Johnson, 85% chance you're not going to get seriously ill enough to end up in the hospital in the ICU, and you're not going to die from COVID-19. The other thing that's interesting about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is it came online a little bit later than the other two. And the Johnson & Johnson is the only vaccine that has actually been tested against the South African variant. They actually did some of their studies in South Africa and on populations of color, but the South African variant was not in the areas where the Moderna and the Pfizer were actually evaluated, whereas Johnson & Johnson was. So honestly, those have not been tested as of yet, or at least data has not been published about Moderna and Pfizer against the South African variant. And as you probably have heard in the news the past week, there's all kinds of variants out there. There's a Brazilian variant. There's a couple different variants in California where I live. So things are dynamic. This is a changing situation. It's not static. So we'll get into that a little bit more. But one thing to point out is that the flu vaccine, which many of us get every single year, is generally between 30 and 60% effective. So all three of these are way more effective than a flu vaccine. So I think they are all good vaccines. So just keep that in mind. We can move on, Gloria. Thank you. So how do they work? Well, there have been a lot of press and a lot of interest, particularly in Moderna and Pfizer, because they are using a brand new technology called messenger RNA. And it's new, but it's not new. So we're going to get into that a little bit. So the thing to keep in mind is that all vaccines, not just COVID-19, but every vaccine one takes, it essentially is teaching your immune system how to recognize and fight off what we call a pathogen. In this situation, it's a virus. It's the COVID-19 virus. So all three of them, they're teaching our bodies and our own immune system how to fight off this virus, because that's how we rid of it. The vaccine doesn't get rid of it. Our body gets rid of it. So messenger RNA vaccines, how do they work? So at the top, you'll see the diagram. You'll notice that ball again with the spike sticking off. In this case, they're orange, but this is the coronavirus, COVID-19. So way back in January of 2020, scientists were able to sequence and actually get down to the bottom line of the genetic code of this virus. And what that means is if they can get the genetic code, they can then make it in a lab once they determine what it is. But what they did is they decided, let's just take the genetic code of this spike protein and let's just develop something called a messenger RNA. So what is a messenger RNA? A messenger RNA is a substance that all of us have. All of us have messenger RNA in our own bodies. And its job is to give a message of how to repair something. So for instance, if you go out and you're playing basketball or something and you do a bad sprain on your ankle, or maybe even have a partial tear in your muscle, your body has to repair that. Well, how does it repair it? Your messenger RNA gives instructions to your cells on how to go in and bring the appropriate proteins in there to repair that tissue. So think of messenger RNA as instructions. It's instructions to do something. In our body, it's instructions to repair something that went wrong. In this vaccine, it's instructions on how to make the spike protein. So we can move on to the next slide. Oh, you have a question?
There's a question from one of the viewers. They want to know, is there a difference between the first and the second dose of the vaccine?
No, it's actually the same. And one of the things that happens is, it's kind of interesting. When you get the first dose of the vaccine, your body has really never seen this before. So it's kind of saying, what's going on here? I don't know exactly what this is. Let's check it out. So you have all these cells in your immune system that go around. There's a type of blood cell called a macrophage, and it goes and it takes a few munches off of this protein that's in there. Like, I don't know what this is. And it gets involved with things called T helper cells, which are types of lymphocytes, and there are B cells. So all of these different type of cells in our own immune system sample it, they present it to other cells. And then eventually your B cells, which make antibodies, say, hey, this doesn't belong here. So you start making antibodies against that particular protein, which in this case is a spike protein. So what happens is on the first vaccine, your body is first presented with this. It doesn't know what to do. But by the time you get the second vaccine, your army is ready. It says, hey, wait a minute, we know what this is. This doesn't belong here. And it just comes and wham, it attacks it. So that is why, and we'll get into this a little bit later, people get a few more symptoms on the second shot. So it's the same dose, but it's kind of like a priming dose and a follow-up, but it's about the same. So let's go back to the previous slide, Gloria, on the messenger RNA. So what they're doing is they're taking a little piece of this spike protein. They've got the genetic sequence. So they synthetically make the messenger RNA in a lab. So this messenger RNA, and again, just codes on how to make a piece of this spike protein. So the spike protein is put into, the messenger RNA is into the vaccine. It goes into our body. And then our body produces the spike protein, and then our own immune system actually develops the antibodies against this spike protein. Next slide, please. So how is this different from other vaccines? And I have a next slide that's going to show this. And the thing to keep in mind, if we can move forward, Gloria, is there are 3 different types of vaccines. There's actually 3 types of coronavirus vaccines, but pretty much there's 3 types of vaccines, period. So number 1, a protein-based vaccine. What this is you actually take the virus or a piece of the virus and you have to culture it. You have to grow it in a lab. And once it's grown to a certain point, you have enough of it, you can actually kind of purify it, sterilize it so it's no longer infectious, and then inject it. This is the flu virus. The flu vaccine. The flu vaccine is a protein-based vaccine. Every year, they have to culture the different strains of the flu viruses, and there are many. And they're guessing a year ahead of time what strains are going to be around next year. They culture it in a lab, and then what they call attenuate it. They make it non-infectious to inject. It takes months to do this, so it takes a long time. The second type of vaccine here that we see is called a viral vector vaccine, and this is the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. What they've done in this vaccine is they've taken some of the genetic material from the coronavirus, and they again purify it. Now, you'll see next to that, it says adenoviral vector is injected. Adenovirus is a cold virus. So what they do, part of the problem is how do we get this genetic material into our body safely but have it survive long enough to do its job? So they take a cold virus and they actually take the cold virus genetic material out of the cold virus, and they put this genetic material of the coronavirus in there. But again, it's just the portion of genetic material that gives instructions on how to make spike proteins. And so again, our body makes the spike protein. Going back to the messenger RNA at the bottom, they put just the messenger RNA in the vaccine. And again, our body makes the spike protein. So, but you'll notice that the end result on the right, its bottom line is our immune system makes antibodies. Our B cells of our white blood cells make antibodies against the spike protein. So the end result is the same. Next slide.
Okay. So we have another question from one of the viewers. And the question is, what are the possible impacts on those who have an already compromised immune system?
Well, one thing that's very clear is that if you have an already compromised immune system, your chances of becoming very, very ill if you're infected with COVID-19 are very high. So absolutely check with your physician for your specific situation. But generally, even if you have a compromised immune system, the vaccine is recommended. And one of the things that's important to know that none of these vaccines have live virus. None of them have the viral components that can give you COVID-19. So vast majority of people are much better off being immunized against COVID-19.
And, Dr. Cook, I think that that's a really important point that you just made, because when I hear people say, I'm not going to take it, you just explained that there is not the live virus that they are getting. And the way you explain messenger RNA, it just, again, it's about simplification, simplifying so that they understand. So thank you, for bringing that out. And thank you, viewer, for asking that question. So we can move on to the next slide.
Okay. So this is just to review that almost all vaccines in the United States are what we call attenuated, which again is this protein-based vaccine, which they, attenuate, or it's kind of a partial kill. So it's no live virus in there, but it's enough of the protein that your body recognizes this as that virus and it goes up. So this is the flu shot. The only other viral vector vaccines that have been used in the United States are for dengue fever, which is a tropical disease. If some of you have traveled, you might have had this particular vaccine. And so the technology has been around quite a while, but Johnson & Johnson and also AstraZeneca, which is not approved in the United States, by the way, not yet at least. And they're using the viral vector technology. And Pfizer and Moderna are the only two messenger RNA vaccines approved in the US. And it's important to note that both Moderna and Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson all have emergency approval only. None of these have permanent approval. They're all under emergency use orders because of the significance and the severity of the pandemic. So it's important to keep that in mind. So a question I get all the time is, how were these vaccines developed so fast? And also, I don't trust them because they were developed so fast. So actually, I kind of had the same questions when I first heard about it. So one of the things I did personally, as a physician, patients are going to ask me these questions and I've got to have some kind of answer. So I took a deep dive into how did these vaccines develop so fast. So I'll take you through some slides that I think that will explain this and hopefully make you feel a little bit more comfortable with it. We can move on. So even though messenger RNA vaccines are new, they were developed based on pre-existing knowledge. Information was out there that we've had from past things that we've done. And we'll go ahead and I'll show you some of these things. First thing was messenger RNA. So messenger RNA has been researched since the 70s. And it's sort of an interesting story because there was this Hungarian scientist, Dr. Sherilynn Cooke, and she was working on a messenger RNA technology, and she was working with another immunologist, Drew Weissman, at University of Pennsylvania. So they were trying to figure out how to therapeutically use this messenger RNA. They could make it, but they couldn't quite get it initially into a form that could actually use it. So one of the questions I'll just throw out there that I had when I first heard about messenger RNA is, how did it, if they've been working on it since the 70s, what was the holdup? Well, I called up one of the smartest people I know, one of my classmates from Stanford, who is a PhD in immunology, in addition to an MD. He's currently a pediatric neurosurgeon, definitely a smart guy. And I asked him, I said, well, why did this take so long? And he basically told me, he said, he's done research with messenger RNA too, not for vaccines, but for trying to get, again, remember, a messenger RNA gives instructions. So they've been doing research in cancer, how to use messenger RNA to put an instruction into the body to go fight a particular cancer. And he said the problem is with messenger RNA is it's so sensitive. Our body recognizes it as foreign because it's not our messenger RNA, it's messenger RNA from something else, and it would kill it. It would just absolutely obliterate it, and it could never get into our cells to do the job. So one of the things that they did, Dr. Cooke figured out, is they enveloped the messenger RNA with a little tiny fat layer. It's called a nanolipid layer. So they had to encapsulate this messenger RNA with just a little bit of fat to protect it long enough to get into our bodies and go into our cells to deliver the instructions on how to make this messenger RNA. So she's been working on this, like I said, for 30 years. It's an interesting story because she was up for tenure on some faculties, didn't get her tenure, got let go of some jobs. And, she just stuck with it, nose to the grindstone, to try to get this developed. And of course, it came to light right at the time when we really need it, when we have this pandemic going on. So if we could move on to the next slide, Gloria. Also, let me just note that Dr. Carico is one of the primary scientists on the Pfizer vaccine. So she did all this research, getting this technology together, and she's now one of the lead scientists on the Pfizer vaccine. So the next scientist I want to talk about is Dr. Corbett, but I guess we have a question.
Yeah, we have a question, but also a comment. With Dr. Carico, one of the things with 30 plus years of studying messenger RNA, I'm keeping fingers crossed that she's actually up for a Nobel Prize, because she has done so much work. And it's great to hear you bring that out, because a lot of people just thought this was something that just kind of happened. And 30 years in the making, that's a long time.
It's a long time. That is in the rumor mill that she will probably get a Nobel Prize. And I hope so, because her work that she stuck with against all odds, against, not getting tenured, getting passed over, her work was being criticized. What is this good for? And, now it's come prime time, right when we really, really need it. So.
Right. Oh, awesome. Yeah. So thank you for that. One of the viewers asked a question. How does the flu vaccine and the COVID vaccine interact? Is there a length of time that should be between taking the flu and the COVID vaccine?
We recommend that you separate the COVID vaccine by a month from any vaccine, not just the flu, tetanus, and everything else. We would like some space between those vaccines. And it's not necessarily that the vaccines themselves interact, but your immune system, again, is being ramped up, and it's being ramped up for COVID. And then you have a flu vaccine that's going to ramp it up for flu. And this is the current thought. It might change as flu season rolls around and we start doing more flu vaccines. But right now, the recommendation is you want to separate all the vaccines by about a month. So Dr. Kazmikia Corbett, who is a National Institute of Health PhD scientist, and she is a coronavirus expert. So a lot of you probably remember SARS, which was around in 2003, and also MERS, which is a Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome. And both of these caused severe pneumonias and a lot of deaths. They were not as widespread as COVID-19, but just to point this out, COVID-19's actual formal name is SARS-CoV-2, and it is very similar to SARS, which is SARS-CoV-1. Both of them cause severe, adult respiratory syndrome. So they're very, very, very similar viruses. So Dr. Corbett has been working in this space for over 10 years. She did a lot of work on the MERS virus spike protein. And she had a lot of knowledge on that, knowing the genetic code. But because she did so much work in this area, they knew up front, as soon as COVID-19 came out and they figured out it's a SARS-CoV virus, they knew that they needed to target the spike protein. So again, Dr. Corbett's been working on this for over 10 years, and she jumped in the fray right away. So she is actually one of the lead scientists on the Moderna vaccine. Even though she works for the National Institutes of Health, she was instrumental in developing the Moderna. So both of these scientists have direct relationship to those two messenger RNA vaccines. And it's important to note that the Moderna vaccine uses the messenger RNA technology developed by Dr. Carico. They both use that. And the scientists around the world were sharing information, even though they're developing competing products, they're still sharing information because of how important it is to get this pandemic under control.
Right. We have another question from one of our viewers. They're asking, I'm getting my second shot this week, so what should I expect?
If it's a Pfizer or a Moderna shot, we're going to get into this a little bit more, but definitely expect to get a sore arm, especially if you got one the first time. And people can get some more systemic symptoms. So keep in mind, remember, your body's already been introduced to this on the first shot. So when the second one comes in, your body, your immune system is ready for it. So it's going to attack it. You can get fatigue, you can get some body aches, you can get some joint aches. In some instances, people can actually develop some fever and chills. But what is important to know is that this is not the infection. This is not the COVID-19 infection, but your body is responding as if it is the COVID-19 infection, and it's primed and ready to go attack it. So this slide shows, it's kind of interesting, but what it shows, remember I said that the genetic material of the coronavirus is in the ball. So in this graphic on the left, the big purple ball is the coronavirus, and the orangish looking ball on the right is a human cell. But you'll see the spike protein, which in this case is colored different colors because there's different components of the spike protein. But its sole job is to connect with what we call a human cell receptor. And it connects at a receptor binding domain. So again, its job is to connect onto the human cell. And once it latches on, then it's able to take the genetic material from inside the coronavirus and inject it into the human cell. And that's how people get sick with coronavirus. But remember, these vaccines, they're not making that whole virus. All they're making is the spike protein without the genetic material, which can make you sick. So I think this diagram does a good job of showing you that that spike protein's job is simply a mechanism to bind to the human cell. So it's kind of like a lock and key. You got a lock on the door. You have to have the key to go in it. And, otherwise you can't really get sick. Okay, we can move on. Another question that comes up with the speed at which things developed. And this is the flow that every medication, vaccine that's developed in the United States has to go through FDA approval. And there are phases of study. There's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So phase 1 is simply you got maybe 100 or so healthy volunteers. They're going to be introduced to this, and we're going to see if there's any major side effects or anything. You're like, okay, it passes that. Then it moves to phase 2, and we're looking for, are there any short-term side effects? And you're using a couple hundred people. So then you move on to phase 3, where you have several thousands of volunteers to do this, where you're digging deeper into, is it safe? Is it effective? All 3 of these phases are required to have FDA approval in the United States, even emergency approval. So all 3 of the vaccines have gone through all 3 of these phases. Now, granted, sometimes these phases take years. So I kind of think of it like if you guys watch these home shows where they come in and they build a house in a week. Now, we all know that if we're building a house, it's probably going to take 6 months or a year at least to get a house built. But these home shows come in and they build it in a week. You're like, how did they do this? Well, first of all, they still had to have plans. They still had to get a permit from the planning department. They still had to have all those inspections. But would they come in with enough money and enough people to do this, and they're doing a lot of the work simultaneously, they get it done in a week. So you kind of think about the approval process for these vaccines was very similar, that they were working very rapidly, but it's because they have a lot of people involved, they have a lot of money involved, and a lot of work is going around on simultaneously, and a lot of scientists are sharing information and doing things together. We can move on. So money, definitely instrumental in how these vaccines developed so rapidly. There was $4.1 billion that the United States government invested into Moderna, which was kind of a small company. It didn't have a lot of funding. And then you have Pfizer, which is a giant company, but the government agreed to purchase 200 million doses before the vaccines were actually manufactured. So for this reason, they were able to, hit the ball running. A lot of times they got, small companies are going to have to get investors. They're going to have to raise funds. How are we going to pay for the research? So there was a ton of money dumped into this because it's a public health crisis. It's an emergency because of how severe COVID-19 is. So we can move on, Gloria. Can we have the next slide? So safety, because they were happening so fast, often safety comes up. They do appear to be safe for healthy adults. However, again, these were approved for emergency use. So ongoing monitoring of side effects is happening. There are further clinical trials that are going on for different ages and conditions. Currently, right now, I know Pfizer is running clinical trials on kids down, I believe, to its age 12. The vaccines I should mention, Moderna and Johnson & Johnson are approved for age 18 and older, whereas Pfizer is age 16 and over. But all of them are starting to do studies, not in like little, not down to 2 and 3 year olds yet, but they're kind of going down to 12, 13, and they're going to move up and fill up that gap between 16 and 18. And if it appears to be safe for those ages, then they'll lower it down some more. So, but basically ongoing research into the safety of the vaccine. But so far, it appears to be very safe. Another question that comes up a lot of times is, what about pregnant women? What about breastfeeding women? So just one note on that. No medication in the United States or vaccine is ever initially tested on pregnant or breastfeeding women. It just does not happen. So a lot of our data about what is safe comes about as things just roll out in pregnant women. For instance, during the vaccine trials, there were women who were in the vaccine trial who got pregnant during the vaccine trials, went on, gave birth. There have been no problems, but they did not set out to test this on pregnant women. Same thing with breastfeeding women. They did not set out to test this on breastfeeding women. However, because women have gotten pregnant during the trials, because they've given birth, because they breastfed, they actually have found antibodies in the milk so that those antibodies against COVID-19 would then go into the baby. So that's just something to keep in mind, that they are in the United States, we just don't test new stuff on pregnant or breastfeeding women. So just keep that in mind. We can move on, Gloria. So again, 18 and over for Moderna, 16 for Pfizer, 18 for Johnson & Johnson. Initially, no studies on pregnant or breastfeeding women or children. Contraindications. One person asked this already about autoimmune disease. The only contraindications to getting the COVID-19 vaccine, meaning absolute, you should not get it, is if you're seriously ill. So if you're ill in the ICU with some disease, they're not generally going to give you the COVID-19 vaccine. Or if you have a severe anaphylactic reaction to a first dose, if it's a 2-dose series, they're not going to go back and give you the second dose. But outside of that, there are no absolute contraindications. There are a few precautions. So if you had, say, an allergic reaction to a prior vaccine, you would want to be cautious, but it's not an absolute contraindication. So again, if you have a health condition that you're concerned about, absolutely talk with your physician, because everybody's health and everybody's specific situation is different, but it would really be only if you have a pretty serious issue, because the vast majority of people is totally fine. We do recommend it, basically because the odds of dying from COVID-19 far exceed the odds of having a death from, or even a serious illness from the vaccines. And we can move on. So just to recap this, the COVID-19 vaccines cannot give you COVID-19 because there is no live virus in the vaccine. And in the messenger RNA vaccine, it's only coding for a portion of the spike protein, not the virus itself, nothing infectious in these vaccines. Okay, side effects though. Are there side effects? And I'm going to tell you, yes, there's going to be side effects. On the Johnson & Johnson, it's a little bit newer. It's only been out a few weeks now. Some people are getting sight and pain at the site of the injection. In terms of other effects, Some people develop headache. You can get fatigue. You can get muscle aches. You can get joint aches. Now, these are symptoms, and some people can get fever and chills, and these are symptoms of COVID-19. But again, remember I said that, this is nothing infectious, but it's the spike protein. Your body recognizes this as foreign and it attacks it as if it's the actual virus. So particularly on the second shot. So on the first shot of Pfizer Moderna, most people don't get much of an issue. They get a sore arm. But on the second shot, you can get these things. They usually will go away within 2 days. There are a few outliers where it lasts a little bit longer. I also can tell you that there is definitely more growing evidence that the second shot in particular, can cause swelling of your lymph nodes. And I have seen this in some of my patients. But you got to keep in mind, what are lymph nodes? Lymph nodes are actually part of your immune system, and it's the area in your body where white blood cells, which are involved in immune responses, come into the lymph nodes literally to be trained to go out and attack whatever this foreign invader is, which in this case is the spike protein. So that's why if you get a bad head cold, you might get lymph nodes swollen up in your neck. If you have other types of illnesses, you might get lymph nodes swelling. They're generally sore, they're tender. And this is a normal part of your immune response. So when you get sick, a lot of times you'll get swollen lymph nodes. When you get the second vaccine, a lot of times you will get swollen lymph nodes. They tend to go away within about a month. But again, this is not you're sick from the vaccine. This is your immune system doing what it's supposed to do.
Okay, so Dr. Cooke, a question. A lot of people have talked about pre-medicating prior to getting even the first or the second dose. Mm-hmm. And I've read that it is not recommended. So would you address that? What are you saying to your patients who say, I think I hear I'm going to be a little sore, so I'm going to take some Tylenol or some Motrin. What would you say to that? And then we also have another question from a viewer.
Okay, so I recommend people take some Tylenol. You can pre-medicate with Tylenol or wait till you get your vaccine. Then after you get the vaccine, go ahead and take Tylenol that evening, because most of the symptoms tend to come in the next day. There was some initial studies about ibuprofen and the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, which would be ibuprofen, Aleve, aspirin. Those suppress to some degree the inflammatory response. So the vaccine itself, because it's stimulating your immune system. So there was some thought that this might really dampen down that inflammatory response, which you don't want to do. I think the jury is still out on that, but I'd say it's totally safe to take Tylenol as prophylactic for that. Some people who have a lot of allergies and are concerned about that, I'll tell them take a Claritin before you get the shot. Take an Allegra or some sort of antihistamine. That's fine. It's not going to really make the shot not effective. And even a couple days out, if people are having a lot of body aches, I'll have them take some ibuprofen. But I think the jury is still out on that. But a Tylenol for sure, we know is fine.
Okay, so a viewer asks, what is to be expected from the variants that are being seen, and especially for those who have been administered the vaccine? What should we be prepared for?
Well, that's a very excellent question. And the short answer is we don't know. We do know, as I said, that first of all, variants happen all the time. And what I can say is because there's variants out there and because we don't know how effective the vaccines are going to be for all of these different types of variants, which are all over the place, that is why we're still recommending that people wear a mask. That's why we're recommending you still wash your hands. You have to still do the usual public health things until we know for sure that these vaccines are going to work against the variant. We know, for instance, Johnson & Johnson's effective against the South African variant. But as I said, there's 2 different variants in California. There's variants that are happening all the time because that's the nature of a virus. They mutate. They come up with new variants all the time. So we still have to do our same public health measures that we've been doing. So what I can say in general, just to summarize safety, that actually the data is now over 500,000 deaths from COVID-19 in the United States. There have been over 100 million vaccines given now. There are very rare cases of anaphylactic reactions, which are treated on site. And to date, there have been no documented deaths from the vaccine. But you have to remember that when you have 100 million people in the United States who've been given a vaccine, some of those people are going to die for various reasons. That's a lot of, people have other things every day. So there's nothing to say that you may not have a heart attack 2 days after you get a vaccine. You may not get, an illness, but in terms of have they been proven deaths from the vaccines, the answer is no. Are there cases under investigation? Yes, there are. But again, when you're giving 100 million vaccines, some people are going to get sick in that time frame, and some people are going to die. So that's important to note.
So what are your thoughts in regards to people who have received the vaccine, because now travel has really heated up. People are traveling into other countries, not just within the United States. So what are your thoughts in regards to people who are now traveling, because you mentioned that they still need to wear a mask and social distance, but the thoughts overall, the people who are traveling to other countries, and especially countries where these new variants have been discovered. Any thoughts on that?
I think that, especially traveling to countries where the new variants have been discovered are, it's risky. You definitely still have to go about protecting yourself and protecting others, but I think that you have to be very careful with that. I mean, personally, I am a traveler. Personally, I have not traveled to date, and I probably won't travel out of the country for a while. Countries like Italy, which had opened back up, are now locked back down. They're having resurgence. They're having new variants in various countries around the world. So I think it's a little risky.
Okay.
I think it's a little risky right now.
So another viewer is asking, what if you were previously on antibiotics for post-surgery? Will that interfere with the immune system responding to the vaccine?
It should not affect the immune system responding to the vaccine, because antibiotics are for certain bacteria, and this is a virus. So that shouldn't really interfere. Again, you would need to check with your physician, what type of surgery was it, how debilitated are you? All of those things come into play. So in summary, I got the vaccine, but with all the new, variants going on right now, I think it's still important that we need to try to stay safe. There are new guidance out that if you and your immediate family members or other people, friends, small groups can gather if everybody's been vaccinated. But again, one of the things is that if, say, I've been vaccinated, but I go to work, I take care of patients. Let's say I come in contact with a patient who has COVID, and I don't even know it. They don't even know it yet. They get sick after I see them. If I go home or go out somewhere, I've been vaccinated, I may not get sick, but I may come in close contact with someone else. I might potentially pass that virus off to someone else. They haven't been vaccinated. They could potentially get sick. So we still need to do our, some social distancing. We still need to wash our hands. We still need to wear our masks, even though we've been vaccinated. But if you've been vaccinated, your odds of getting seriously ill or dying from COVID is low. However, the caveat is these new variants are out there, and we have not fully figured out what's going to happen with them yet.
Right. We're going to just take a real quick break. And when we come back, I would like for us to end on the note of you talking about taking vitamins as it relates to, COVID-19. And so you guys don't go away. We'll be right back.
Thank you for watching the You Didn't Get the Memo show with your inspirational host, Gloria Bailey Ray. It's your contributions that make this happen. To become a sponsor, send an email to youdidn'tgetthememo@gmail. That's the letter U, didn't get the memo. If you're not in a space to be a sponsor, but you like what you hear, we simply ask that you support what you like by making a contribution to the show. There are 3 ways to make an online donation. Visit paypal.me/Gloria Bailey Ray or Cash App or Venmo, Gloria Bailey Ray. Give what you can. Your support is appreciated.
Okay, so before we conclude with Dr. Cooke, who has done an excellent job with talking about COVID-19, how it works, how it attacks our body, and how the vaccines work to prevent COVID. But before we just took this quick break, one of the things in your slide, you talk about taking multiple vitamins, zinc, vitamin C, vitamin D. Would you tell us why that is recommended?
Okay. So first thing that came out, there was a study that came out that showed that a lot of hospitalized patients in the ICU with COVID-19 had low vitamin D. And it made this big splash. And I thought, that's interesting because most of my patients that I see that I test have low vitamin D. So pretty much all of us have low vitamin D. So certainly, I can't say for sure that there's a link between low vitamin D and COVID-19, but I know we're low anyway, so it might help. So I think it's definitely a good idea to take vitamin D, and usually between 4,000 and 5,000 international units a day. You have to keep in mind that with any kind of virus, in basically any kind of infection in general, it's our own immune system that cures us. So anything we can do to bolster and help our own immune system do a better job is going to help us in the fight against COVID-19 or any other type of infection. So you want to be as healthy as you possibly can, good nutrition, getting your sleep, getting your exercise. I do recommend a multivitamin for everybody every day. I do recommend calcium and vitamin D every day. And zinc has been shown to be effective against some of the cold viruses. I don't think it's been proven to be helpful against a coronavirus yet, but it's not going to hurt anything. So I think it's reasonable to go ahead and take that. And I think it's reasonable to go and help and take vitamin D because people who have been in the ICU, you're depleting their vitamin Ds anyway. So I think it's reasonable to do these things, but just a caveat, I'm not saying if you do these things, you won't get COVID-19.
Right, absolutely. But also just having a vitamin regimen because they are not getting a lot of the vitamins that, we would get in our diets anyway. So thank you for expounding on that. I want to thank you again, Dr. Cooke, for being on this show and for just enlightening us. We appreciate you giving up your time and really talking about COVID. I know that I've learned even more, and I've probably done a lot of research around it, but hearing it from you and from your perspective as a physician, that's really, really important. I want to say to all of our viewers today, listen, I want you guys to do everything that you possibly can with regards to taking care of yourself. Before we conclude, I'm just going to bring Dr. Cooke back in. We've got one person, Dr. Cooke, that has a question. They're not going to let you go, but I'm going to allow this. It says, if there are more severe symptoms from the second dose, when should the medical doctor be contacted?
That's an excellent question. And I would say if it's going to keep you up at night, you should contact your doctor. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go in, but at least a call or an email or something just to see, are these symptoms normal? Like I got calls this week about swollen lymph nodes. That's going to keep somebody up at night. And I was able to tell them, no, this happens. We know this happens. And it's interesting. One of the ways that it was proven that it happened, which is kind of fascinating, is women were going in for their routine mammograms. And the radiologists were seeing swollen lymph nodes on their mammograms and were getting concerned. Is this something, could this be breast cancer? Blah, 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 blah. Long story short, swollen lymph nodes from the vaccine. So we know that people are getting swollen lymph nodes. So you definitely want to, I would say, if you feel something like that, I would call your doctor, let them know about it, and then usually monitor it. They should be gone within about a month. And if they're not, it probably needs to get checked out. So my threshold, if it's going to keep you awake at night, you should call your doctor.
Right. Absolutely. So I want to say, if you guys, after watching this, because I know a lot of people really do, and it is live on YouTube, Facebook, if you have questions or comments, you can still put them in there. I will check back and we will respond to you as quickly as possible. Again, I want to thank Dr. Cooke for being on. Thank her for her time. I want to just remind all of you to remember to support our efforts by asking about our sponsorship opportunities or making a donation of any amount. Be sure and follow me on all my social media platforms. And as always, I say, if you didn't take anything away from today's show, then it's you who didn't get the memo. Until this time next week, every Tuesday, 5 p.m. Pacific time, be sure to be well, to social distance, wash your hands, wear a mask, and when it's your turn, make sure that you get vaccinated. Be well, God bless, and remember this: the quality of your life is determined by the decisions that you make. I'm Gloria Bailey Ray, your host. Be well, God bless.